At the back, at the rear of Quad.
Thank you. Please be seated. Good evening, everyone. Eid Mubarak, for those to whom that applies. Welcome to the July meeting. Can everybody hear me? Yes. People holding their ears? Yeah, okay. Welcome to the July meeting of the Council. I'd like to welcome those in attendance, members of the public who are watching online, to the Derby Loves You venue. And I'd like to express thanks to those officers who've worked tirelessly in the last few days to try and make this right for us. And it is cooler than we all anticipated, which is great. I've several announcements to make, but first I'll deal with the procedural matters. Item 1 is apologies. Now, members of the public will note that we have a significantly reduced attendance at this evening's meeting. Whilst this venue is large enough to accommodate all councillors and members of the public safely, given rising COVID-19 case rates locally, it was considered a sensible precaution to reduce the number of members present. This is predominantly to ensure that the democratic processes of the council could still function in the event of those here tonight having to self-isolate. Thank you to political groups for your cooperation in this matter. I've asked that this arrangement is placed on record in the minutes of this meeting and the reasons for absence are noted. Now, can I take apologies? Councillor, the Conservative group, somebody, or have we actually a list of those not attending? In which case I'll ask Alex to read out the names of those not attending.
Apologies, Mr. Mayor. Yes, those councillors not attending, voluntarily not attending this evening to aid social distancing are councillors. I'll go through all groups at once, by your permission, if that's okay. Are councillors Atwell, Bettany, Kerr, Cooper, Froggatt, Graves Jr., Grimadell, Hassel, Ingle, Jennings, Jangir Khan, Shiraz Khan, Cuss, McChrystal, Nater, Pandy, Patterson, Poulter, Sandhu, Smale, Webb and Willoughby, and we've also received apologies from Councillor Martin and Councillor Shanker.
Has anybody any names to add to that list? I think it's important to note that our attendance at meetings does go on the website, so there will be a note put that people are selflessly going to watching this online rather than attending this evening. Thank you for that. Item 2 is declarations of interest, and I understand that the Monitoring Officer will shortly address the meeting to grant a dispensation for all councillors to debate and vote upon the recommendations of the Independent Remuneration Panel. Are there any declarations of interest? Councillor Peatfield.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to declare my interest in the bids of Cathedral Quarter and St Peter's Quarter. I'm on the board of both. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Phelan, do you want to tell us a bit more?
Yes, thank you, councillors. As you are aware, at item 10 of the agenda, we have the report of the Independent Remuneration Panel. Given the content of the report, I'm granting a dispensation to all councillors for the duration of this meeting from the restrictions under section 31(4)(a) and B of the Localism Act 2011. This is to allow all councillors to participate in discussions and vote on this item on the agenda without the need to declare a specific interest. Thank you.
Councillor Barker.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. During councillor questions, there is a question relating to the market hall, which I may be called upon to answer. And I would just like to declare that I am the national president of NABMAR, the National Association of British Market Authorities, which of course has dealings with and does deal with Derbyshire City Council. There's no pecuniary advantage on my part.
Thank you for that. Now the item 3 is the minutes of the last meeting held on the 26th of May. Now approve the minutes of the previous meeting. Will somebody move the minutes, please? Thank you, Councillor Pearce. Seconder, Councillor Williams. Thank you. Anybody against? Okay, that's carried. Item 4 is announcements from the Mayor. I have several announcements to make this evening. Firstly, I'd like to thank all those who have been involved with the arrangements and the engagements I've undertaken during my first 2 months in office, which have proved very enjoyable. It's been great to get out and about across Derby and see how residents, businesses and charities are all recovering from the impacts of the pandemic. I've several housekeeping matters to report. Firstly, I was delighted to receive a face mask. There we are. It's got, you can't see it from there, and it does say on it, Girl Guiding Derbyshire County, and a poem from the Girl Guiding Derbyshire recently, which includes an important message about keeping safe during the pandemic. And I'd like to take the opportunity to read it to you. If you would all help with spreading the message on social media, I'm sure they'd appreciate it. Here at Girl Guiding Derbyshire, we thought we would ask if you would do us a favour and wear our fab mask, then take a quick selfie and add a hi from you and post on your socials with a tag for us too. We're grateful to our members for all that they've done, keeping a safe space for girls to laugh, chat and have fun. A tag from you will make our volunteers' day and give us another chance to say, Girl Guiding Derbyshire, you're amazing. delighted to be able to hand that on to you. For our meeting, please wear your face covering throughout and maintain social distancing when moving about the room. Face coverings can be removed when speaking, thank goodness. Secondly, I have one late item to table, which is a minute extract from the meeting of the Council of Cabinet held on Wednesday, the 14th of July. Copies of the minute were circulated earlier in the week by Democratic Services, and I propose that this item will be taken following receipt of the annual report of the Audit and Governance Committee. Fellow councillors, I'm saddened to report the passing of former Councillor Anne MacDonald and former Mayoress Bethig Chadwick since we last met in May. Anne MacDonald served 2 terms as Labour Councillor for Chaddesden from 2002 to 2007 and 2012 to 2016. She'll be fondly remembered by many of those present this evening. Anne's funeral is due to take place at 10 a.m. on Friday the 30th of July at St Mary's Church, Chaddesden, followed by a committal service at Markeaton Crematorium at 11, both of which councillors who knew Anne are invited to attend. Donations in her memory will be made to Amnesty International and Plan International. If you would like to contribute, please contact Member Services for more details. Bethig Chadwick was the Mayoress in 1990-91 and the wife of the former Councillor and Mayor Barry Chadwick, who died in 2019. Before we pause for a minute's silence, is there anybody who would like to say a few words about either former Councillor MacDonald or Mrs Chadwick? Councillor Dinser, there's light straight in my eye. Beg your pardon. Councillor Dinser.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to speak on behalf of Anne MacDonald. Anne MacDonald was a true servant and a public service committed individual. As you mentioned, she served 2 terms on the council from 2002 to 2007 and 2012 to 2016. But she had a career as a teacher, and she had continued to be a stalwart of the Labour Party and movement, particularly from her base. And it's remiss to not say Tony when you say Anne MacDonald, because they were a team, married, but a team who were really established and well known for their championing of looking after the people of Chaddesden and standing up for them wherever they could, whether Anne was in the council as an elected councillor or she was not in office, but she continued to work. She continued to work in the Labour Party, in the Labour movement, and they will be sadly missed in our own movement. But I do know that they will be missed in the Chaddesden communities in terms of what they've done over many years. And Anne was a solid supporter of wanting to fight inequality and challenge those people who are being ignored by the state and public services. She will be sadly missed by us all on the Labour group, by the people of Chaddesden and wider, and some of the movements and campaigns she led on, in particular with her husband, Tony MacDonald.
Thank you, Councillor Dinser. Anybody else? Councillor Graves, beg your pardon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to speak on for Anne MacDonald. When I first became a councillor, I did know Anne MacDonald, and she was one of Labour's stalwart campaigners. She was a particularly good councillor. She was there for the people that elected her. She was what I would call an old-fashioned Labour councillor. She was there for the ordinary people of her ward. And I think it's very sad that you've now today announced the fact that she has died, and she will be sorely missed.
Thank you. I think we can say that the whole council, those of us who remember Anne, will miss her. She's certainly made a contribution in so many ways. Beatty Chadwick was a formidable lady, and she died recently in her 90s. It's honest to say that she frightened me. She was that formidable. She was extremely Welsh, if that's possible. She loved music, but she was very strict about all sorts of things, and belonged to the Welsh Baptists here in Derby. Obviously, I would have asked Roy Webb to speak, but he's not here. But he has given me a note, which I shall read to you now. Beatty Chadwick grew up in Istalifera, and I hope I've got that right, and I'm sure that Roy put that there just to trip me up. A former mining village in the upper Swansea Valley with a strong chapel tradition. Beathig was a beautiful singer with a typical Welsh lilt. When Beathig and Barry were in civic office, the then civic services officer, Phil O'Brien, who happens to be here tonight, engineered an invitation for them to visit Istalifera in their official capacity as guests of the Lord Mayor of Swansea. She was fiercely proud of her Welsh heritage, and she engaged fully with Derby's Welsh society. It was a pleasure to see her converse fluently in Welsh and English when occasions allowed. As you knew her, Mr. Mayor, Roy would have said, I was surprised to find out that she scared you. Beathig was kind and gentle, but held strong opinions and expressed them. She will be missed by her family and friends. If nobody has anything else to say on the matter, we'll stand for a minute's silence. Thanks. Item 5 is statements by members of the Council Cabinet. I understand there aren't any. Item 6 is questions from members of the public. Next, we'll hear questions from members of the public. We've received 19 in total, although some have been grouped together as they're on similar topics. I'll take this opportunity to remind everyone that Council agreed a change to the Council questions process in February. Written responses have been published in the Council questions booklet, which is available to view online. We will still hear a summary of each question from an officer before moving directly to supplementary questions from those members of the public in attendance. There is a 30-minute time limit applied to questions from the public, and I'd encourage each questioner to be concise to ensure we can deal with every question on the agenda this evening. I'll refer to Alex Huff to go through the summaries.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I believe we'll move straight to question C, because I don't believe that Natalie Hollingworth or Dorothy Skrytek are currently here. Can't see them. So we'll move straight to question C, which is from Mayor Perkins to Councillor Matthew Holmes. That question is, will the Council review its local plan and develop a climate emergency strategy in response to the climate emergency?
Mayor Perkins, do you have a supplementary to ask? Please.
Thank you. That's really positive and great to hear. Will the local plan include a carbon reduction pathway that the residents of Derby will have an opportunity to input to? And that pathway will be to get to net zero and includes an understanding of the baseline CO2 emissions within Derby and the emissions inherent in any future planned developments within the plan period. Thank you.
Councillor Holmes.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll certainly look to include that. The scope of work is wide and varied, and yes, we certainly can look to implement that kind of forward planning.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The next public questions we have in attendance are for question D, which is from Paul Tice, and I believe he's also asking a supplementary question on behalf of Craig Tice this evening. They are to Councillor Ralston, and the question is, will the Cabinet member clarify several aspects of the tender process for Alistry Hall and Golf Course in respect of available subsidy from the Council, EOI scoring criteria, renewed interest from a third party, and relocation of golfing facilities?
Mr. Tice, do you have a supplementary question?
Two bidders exceeded the golf expressions of interest scoring criteria, which I've found from Freedom of Information Act requests. The Council rejected both for requesting a subsidy, which another Freedom of Information Act request reveals is untrue. The funding request came from a high scoring bidder in the event that they had to TUPE council staff, most of which I've since discovered are under subcontract. Why were both bidders rejected when neither requested a subsidy?
Councillor Ralston.
Thank you for your question. In line with the process, the principle of the way that the process was carried out, from my understanding, it is not subject to the procurement regulations or the Council's contract procedure rules. There are no prescribed requirements in terms of how an EOI process is run, and that said, the Council does operate an EOI procedure on a regular basis and applies a clear and fair process, which ensures equality between applicants. I have looked at those, the EOI bids that we received, and unfortunately none of them did meet the full requirements that were in place at that time, and that's the place that we are at. The golf club is now closed, and it has been throughout this financial year, and we are moving forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Tice, do you have another supplementary on behalf of your brother, based on the original answer, not on the answer to supplementary?
I'm not satisfied with that answer from Councillor Ralston. I'd like that to go on record. Thank you. Supplementary question in response to the answer is Kedleston Park rates for under 18s rise to £600 per annum, not the £120 stated. Sinfin's inaccessible for many on the north side of Derby due to travel and the negative carbon impact. The equality impact assessment has only one positive impact, which was a partially sighted person would not get struck by a golf ball if the golf course closed. The remaining impacts on protected groups were all negative. How was the Council able to make this decision to close the golf course in 2019 in advance of this equality impact assessment and a public consultation that resulted in over 75% of the public requesting that the golf course be kept?
Councillor Ralston.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Those figures that I quoted within there, I actually spent some time doing some research on this. I spoke to a number of clubs within a few miles radius of what was Alistry Park Golf Club. Kedleston Park was one of those that I spoke to, and I spoke to the manager there, who did explain to me that there are facilities for children from 0 to 12 to have a membership at that club. Indeed, there's also a membership at Morley Hayes, which allows a tower membership and has a full academy there. That academy is East Midlands Golf Academy. I spoke to James Waitley, who himself had a look at this, the potential of running Alistry Park as an academy. And in his own words, he said that the facilities at Alistry Park were not suitable for a coaching academy. And he is somebody with experience and who is running one itself within, I'll just check the mileage, within less than within 5 miles of what was Alistry Golf Course. I must say that we must remember that this is not the only golf course in Derby. There are dozens of golf courses, but one that was still operating under Derby City Council ownership is Sinfin Golf Course. And indeed, that was actually closer to the proximity of the centre of the city, within 3.8 miles of the city centre, and offers a junior membership of £65 per year, with an option to pay £5 a month. There's some excellent facilities there. There's excellent facilities for the youth of this city to indeed get involved in membership. And I spoke to them directly and confirmed that they weren't full, that they did have opportunity and availability for new members to join should anybody be interested. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
We move on. Alex.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To move on to the next question, I believe that Joe Giuliano and Richard Stokes aren't here with us this evening, so we'll move directly to question G, which is from Doug Lumley to Councillor Webb. That question is, what actions have Derby City Council taken to improve the quality of housing in the city? I'm not sure if there's another cabinet member who would be able to answer that in Councillor Webb's absence. Councillor Holmes.
Mr. Lumley, do you have a supplementary? Please come forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Webb, for a very full explanation of what is being done and has been done and is being planned. I would like to say that in my contacts I've had with electors in my ward, there do appear yet to be, still to be people who don't quite know how they're going to get any action on their problem. So I'm asking you for an avenue that they need to follow in order to get direct action from the relevant landlords and organisations.
Thank you. Councillor Holmes, are you able to answer that?
Thank you. Obviously, I don't speak for Councillor Webb. He's far more knowledgeable than me in this particular area of policy. However, I will give you the assurance that we'd like to learn more about that particular issue. It sounds to me as though that can be resolved by the neighbourhood working process, and we'd certainly be able to be in contact with you if that's okay to discuss it further, so we can get some communication there and understand what the avenues are for this to be resolved.
Clarify. Someone will clarify to me what process the tenant needs to take. Do I understand correctly?
Thank you. The next one, Alex.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The next question is question H from Adrian Howlett to Councillor Matthew Holmes. That question is, what urgent work is being undertaken to protect Derby from extreme climate events, particularly in respect of the emergency response to extreme heat?
Right, well, good evening.
Howlett, do you have a supplementary?
Yes, I do.
Please put it.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for the reply and talking about the local resilience forums, and you also mentioned the Climate Commission. My supplementary question is this. Can you just describe what is the Climate Commission? What is its authority? And why is it only met twice in the years that it's been in existence? Thank you very much.
Councillor Holmes.
Thank you. The Commission is cross-party, has representation from all but one group on this council. It's independently led. It has a range of discussions. Councillor Peatfield, for example, is part of a subgroup, I believe, on transport. Councillor Peatfield. And that feeds through to recommendations, or will feed through to recommendations, and will help us form the climate change strategy for the council. It's a very valuable cross-party commission, which we support as administration, and it's a demonstration of a joint commitment cross-party to deliver on climate change and decarbonisation of this authority. It will deliver a lot in the future months and hopefully in years, and is working as quickly as it can to do that.
Question I, Alex.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Question I is from both Tony Rolick and Bal Mahal, and that question is to Councillor Matthew Holmes again. Question being, will the council accept liability for injuries to pedestrians caused by the use of Eastwood Drive as a rat run? Why is the council allowing drivers to make U-turns at the junction of Eastwood Drive and the A5111? And what is the wider impact of the closure of Eastwood Drive to through traffic?
Mr. Rolick, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, please. Yes. Why are the dangers caused by the rat run traffic on North Street using the pavement being ignored by Little Over Ward councillors and Derby City Council, please?
Councillor Holmes.
Thank you. I don't speak for the ward councillors, but I do know that all concerned are working very hard towards a solution. I'm a great believer in those solutions being formulated and being delivered with support at a local level. Whilst we understand the issues, me as cabinet member and relevant cabinet members are taking an interest in this, but we're not imposing the solution. We want local ward councillors working with local residents to come up with the solutions, and I believe that's what's occurring at the moment.
Is Mr. Mahal present? Do you wish to ask a further supplementary based on the original answer? Please take the microphone.
Firstly, I'm totally unsatisfied with the councillor's answers in the text. My supplementary question is, why have Little Over ward councillors not included the safety of Manor Road Central Reservation U-turns as an issue, as they insist it's the main reason not to close the rat run? Thank you.
Councillor Holmes, are you able to respond?
Not for the Little Over ward councillors, Mr. Mayor. I do appreciate your question, but I'll refer you to my previous reply. You know, this is something which needs to be discussed and dealt with quite rightly at a local level, and I believe that is the case. I will assist as much as I can, but obviously officers are there to support what they need to do and what they need to put forward to try and find a solution at a local level. There's not much more I can say on behalf of Little Over ward councillors, I'm afraid.
Question J, Alex.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Question J is from Bernadette Gross, Marcus James, Elizabeth James and Karen Springer in relation to the holiday activity and food programme. Those questions being, will the Cabinet member clarify various aspects of the support available to children to access the holiday activities and food programme, including the extent of financial provision, the number of children who benefited from the Easter half programme, and the support available to those who cannot attend an activity and food centre?
Bernadette, is that you?
Yes.
Would you like to put a supplementary question?
I would, yes. Firstly, in relation to the provision being provided for children, I would like to know what I have heard with my local knowledge is that parents are also receiving much needed meal and food vouchers. As recently as the 13th of this month in the local paper, it was made clear that this wasn't going to happen. I would be interested to know, when did the council change its mind?
Councillor Williams, are you able to respond?
I am, thank you. The article that appeared in the local paper was not from this council. It was the opinion of one councillor, and had that councillor asked the question, they'd have been informed that we have recently received some extra funding to help the HAF programme and the summer programme. We have titled that the Derby Summer Promise, and part of that, on top of the activities that we are doing with young people throughout the city, we're also able, with that extra funding, to actually give some vouchers as well, not only for groceries, but we're also able to look at other things in the city that were costing families hardships. And some of those, for example, are uniforms. We therefore have also given vouchers out to families who have children in year 6 transitioning to secondary school, as well as the vouchers, as well as the holiday activity programme, and all of the extras going along with that. The vouchers are able to be used in 7 of the main supermarkets here in Derby, and again we have a very good facility within the city for anybody who doesn't get those vouchers. They are able to access food support through the community hubs and the Derby Food Alliance, Food for Thought Alliance.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Marcus James, or somebody speaking on behalf of Marcus James? If you're asking on behalf of Marcus James and your supplementary is based on the original answer, yes, please.
Am I just allowed one supplementary?
You are personally, but if Mr. Marcus James has asked you to speak on his behalf, You can do so. Is he present?
I do have another question.
Sorry.
Mr. Mayor, I believe that Marcus James and Elizabeth James have given written notice that they're unable to attend this evening and have asked Bernadette Gross to ask their supplementary questions on their behalf.
In which case, would you put their questions?
So I don't get another supplementary question?
No. You get a supplementary question on behalf of Marcus James or Elizabeth James, who have asked you to speak for them.
I also had a question about the HAF scheme, which hasn't been, I actually haven't had a chance to speak about.
That is not based on the original answer, so I have
That was
to
another
ask you.
question that I actually submitted to the council.
I must ask you to take your seat again, please,
So
Bernadette.
may I not ask supplementaries then for Marcus and Liz?
Yes, if they have given you one. Yes, please read it out.
Yes, yes. If the food and activity centres are not accessible because of distance or mobility issues, in the event of a family not being able to access a centre, what provision will be made to ensure that the child does not go without a meal on that day, so that the funding given to the council to administer reaches the child who needs it?
Thank you very much for the question. What we have done is, I just talked earlier about the vouchers, but we've also been working with our partners in public transport. Any family that would like to access provision across the city that might not necessarily be within their ward, so therefore not easily accessible via foot, we are working with our local transport providers to issue the families with actual vouchers for the transport for the buses. We are also working with our partners who have taken on some of the issues around our SEND children, and those providers have looked extensively at the way that the children will be transported to and from their activities. We have an agreement in place that should a family require specialist transport, whether that be taxi or other aspects, that we will as a council provide that, and we will indeed pay for that. So I hope that covers your point there.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Is there a supplementary on behalf of Elizabeth James? Please put that then.
If a family lives too far away from a centre or can't afford the bus fare, will they, in that set of circumstances, be provided with the means to do so that they can still access the meal?
Councillor Williams.
Thank you. Yes, as I've just said, we've been working with the providers there. Anybody that wants to register for the activity programmes, when they register with the providers, they will be asked a series of questions, and one of those questions will be around accessibility, and do they need and require support to actually access that. So if they do need that transportation support, they will receive that, and that will be through the provider, paid for by the council. And again, like I said, if they cannot access it for other reasons, such as isolation, for example, the vouchers have already gone out to school and have already, in some circumstances, been used. So hopefully there should be no reason for anybody to not be able to access the programme, except for, of course, items like being pinged. Thank you.
Is Karen Springer present, or has she sent? Yep. Karen, would you like to put a supplementary question?
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Williams, for your written answer. How will you monitor the additional inclusive support you have sourced from other organisations for the very vulnerable children described in my question who are not entitled to free school meals?
Councillor Williams.
Thank you. We do work alongside a lot of our partners, so people like Vulnerability, Umbrella, Safe and Sound. We are working very closely with the Parent Carers Together Forum, who we have also given additional funding to over the holidays to provide additional support and activities for those children who might not necessarily come within the ban for free school meals. So what we're doing is working with them. The HAF programme itself is fully monitored by the DFE and has to have returns. But for those that don't come under the HAF programme and are funded with extra funding from the council, we'll be working with them to make sure that it's fully assessed. And because we have actually got another programme coming up in December.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Question K, Alex.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Question K is from Carmel Swan to Councillor McChrystal, but we'll refer it to the Deputy Leader again. The question is, what is the role of the Council in protecting the heritage of Derby and what measures have been implemented to protect the Abbey Pub and St Mary's Bridge?
Thank you for your response, very much appreciated. I want to focus a supplementary question on the Abbey Pub, which is a Grade 2 star monument located in the centre of Darley Abbey. In your response, you talked about the fact that there'd been a recent review of the external condition and the building, and it confirmed that it was in a reasonable condition. Was that a formal process? And is that, if that's so, and there was a report undertaken, will that be made public?
Councillor Holmes, are you able to answer that?
We'll supply a written reply, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. And secondly, you've also...
No, I'm afraid you only get one supplementary question. Question L, Natalie's not present, Dorothy's not present. Question N, Mayor Perkins again. Alex, would you like to?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mayor Perkins to Councillor Matthew Holmes' question is, will Derby City Council run climate emergency training and workshops for all councillors and staff?
Do you have a supplementary to that, Mayor?
Thank you for confirming that climate training will be delivered. When researching this, I read that Somerset Council, as part of their efforts to address the climate emergency, delivered climbing training to all councillors and employees this April. So please, can you let us know when the timescales of when this training will be delivered in Derby City Council, and hopefully this will happen before the new local plan is developed? Thank you.
Councillor Holmes.
Yes, I think we can do that. I'll ask officers to get in touch with you with those details. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 7 then, questions relating to Derbyshire Fire Authority and Derby Homes. I understand that none have been received. Item 8 is questions from non-council cabinet members, and we now move to that. There are 21 in total, with some having been grouped together. Due to the unusual circumstances this evening, with many councillors voluntarily absent, I intend to allow discretion for an alternative councillor to ask a supplementary question if the questioner is not in attendance. Similarly, supplementary responses will either be provided by the Deputy Leader, an alternative Cabinet member, or in writing following the meeting. So back to Alex. Question O.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Question O is from Councillor Repton to Councillor Ralston. Would the council consider an outside organisation running Alistry Golf Course?
Councillor Ralston.
Apologies, I'll just get the response in front of me. Can't remember it all off the top of my head. Is it not the supplementary first, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah. Beg your pardon. Yes. Councillor Repton, have you a supplementary question?
I certainly do, Mr. Mayor. Keynes, the famous American economist, once said, "When the facts change, I change my mind." So why does the Conservative controlled council stubbornly refuse to at least look again at this issue? We have a respected organisation like the Ian Woosman Golf Academy saying that they'll take over this golf club at no cost to the City Council. Why on earth won't the council look at this again?
Councillor Ralston, sorry to trip you up earlier.
No worries, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for the question, Councillor Repton. The Ian Woosam Academy that you've referred to have actually made no approach to this council. They may be saying it publicly, but I can assure you, having asked the questions to officers, no formal approach has been made. The point is that the EOI was carried out from January and I believe was extended due to COVID. And that was right to do so, but none of those people met the requirements. And as I said earlier, having spoken to somebody from the Derby Golf Academy that operates just within a few miles of Alistry Park, he himself looked at this course and determined that the facilities there would not be in keeping with a academy. There is no facilities for a golf range, no facilities for training facilities, etc., and the parking is limited. The fact is that this is being operated now as a park and it will remain as a park. It's been utilised far more as a park than it ever was as a golf course, and I think that should be celebrated. Thank you.
Thank you. Question P.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Question P is from Councillor Prosser to Councillor Pearce. What fines have been issued to date from the Corporation Street bus gate and how is the money being used?
Councillor Prosser, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, I do. It's quite clear from the answer here that it's been pushed through without the appropriate consultation and a great taxpayer expense, and is effectively now asking for the equivalent of retrospective. So can you tell me how much all this has actually cost?
Councillor Pearce.
Well, I wasn't expecting that question. Unfortunately, I can't offhand Councillor Prosser, so I will come back to you in writing on that.
Thank you. Councillor, question Q, Alex.
Question Q is from Councillor Graves Senior to Councillor Pearce again. Can the Cabinet member justify elements of the Wastewise contract which have resulted in green waste being transported a greater distance than under the previous contractual arrangements?
Councillor Graves Senior, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, please, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Pearce, I've asked twice now about the question around costs. What savings will the council make in monetary terms?
Councillor Pearce.
Councillor Graves, the waste by bid was £76,000 lower than the other bidder. I would class that as a saving. Thank you.
Thank you. Question R, Alex.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There have been 6 questions received in relation to question R from 3 different councillors. Please can the Cabinet, to Councillor Williams, please can the Cabinet member respond to questions related to the holiday, activities and food programme in respect of transport needs, non-attendance, equalities impact assessments and interpreters? How has the outcome from the Easter programme been evaluated?
Is Councillor Nater present? Is there somebody that wants to ask a supplementary on his behalf? Councillor Lind, I will be asking you for your supplementary, but do you wish to speak for Councillor Nater first?
Sorry, I'm a bit confused because there was a few different, so we're just on the transport. Yeah, no further questions. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Right. Councillor Hazelgrave, do you want to ask a supplementary?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I think this relates to the question which I set, what evaluation was done by the 4-day HAF programme during the school's Easter holidays, and that's set out in the paperwork as 5 as a response. And my question on that is, will you ensure better evaluation is done for the summer programme that is shared? And why was Councillor Shanker told that 13,859 received meals at HAP programmes at Easter, when the actual number was 499?
Councillor Williams.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'll answer the last question first. The reason he was told that number is because that is the number of children, young people that actually received vouchers. So vouchers were given out over Easter period because, again, we received extra funding to go alongside that in terms of the COVID winter grant scheme. Therefore, all children who are in receipt of free school meals also received the vouchers during the Easter holiday. And in terms of the evaluation that we did was provided to the DfE using their process, which you have got a summary of. And again, we will have to do the same process. And I'm pretty sure that I can make sure that we get a copy of that to the councillors.
Thank you. Question S.
And now my
No,
second...
I'm afraid, Councillor Hazelgrave, you...
I have two questions. Yeah.
If you're speaking on behalf of...
No. Mr. Mayor, I have two questions submitted, which have been kind of aggregated in various ways.
So you have another...
And I do have another bite at the charity, and it's a valid bite. Yeah.
Please proceed biting your cherry.
Now, it's point 6 in the paperwork. Will those families whose children receive a free school meal, etc., etc.? And my supplement question is, now that we know vouchers are being issued to support families in most need, as we, the Labour group, have been calling for several months, do you agree that the stress and anxiety for families could have been avoided by making this decision several months ago? And will you commit to working with us to look for solutions at Christmas also, given that in September, the £20 a week supplement for UC claimants will be sadly withdrawn, inevitably making demand by then at Christmas time more urgent?
Councillor Williams.
Thank you. Thanks, Councillor Hazelgrave. I absolutely believe that the way that we have developed the HAF programme and the Derby Summer Promise is the right way to address the challenge that we face here in the city. We've been working with our partners to make sure that those families that need support, help, guidance, activities for the young people are all able to get that. And I will continue to do that. And I know all of my colleagues in here have done what they can through the pandemic to help there. Everybody has been part of that. We will absolutely work together. I've always said to you, my door is always open, whether it be the virtual door or the actual door. Please come and talk to me. What I can't guarantee is that vouchers will be given out again. As I said, for the two instances, both with the Easter and indeed this summer promise, we were fortunate enough to be given extra funding from the government to do as we wanted to do with it. And we have chosen to do voucher support, not only for food, but we've also utilised some of the vouchers for utility bills, for uniforms, as I said earlier, for transport, for young people with SEND, for a lot of inclusion work that we've done, both with the West Indian Community Centre, Safe and Sound, Umbrella, vulnerability. So we have worked extensively to make sure that any extra money that we've come in really does reach those most vulnerable children.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Question S, Alex.
Question S is from Councillor Dinsett to Councillor Pearce. How long does it take council services to investigate and respond?
One moment, Alex. Councillor Lind, I thought you said you had no further questions. I see. Would you like to put your supplementary questions then?
Hi, yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. In relation to my question to the Cabinet member responsible to explain why the Council hasn't completed an equality and impact assessment, I have to say, quite frankly, I think the response is just not acceptable. As a councillor, I've been informed that it is council policy to complete an equality and impact assessment.
Are
for
you
all
coming to a
such
question,
initiatives.
Councillor Lind?
Is this true or is this false? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. What is true is that a formal written EIA has not been completed. What we have legally to do is to pay due regard to the 3 duties of the public sector equality duty, the PSED. During this whole process, that has been done and has been completed, and we have also done that with our providers, and we have worked in conjunction with our partners at Community Action Derby to make sure that those 3 points are in the PSED are addressed. So those 3 points are to eliminate unlawful discrimination, harassment and victimisation and other prohibited conduct. This was addressed by checking of the providers' policies and practices. Their risk assessments were needed, and we have done that. The second point is to advance equality of opportunity between people who share a relevant protected characteristic and those who do not. A conscious effort has been made to ensure coverage of all parts of the city so that no community was neglected. We identified that children with SEND faced additional barriers which could prevent attendance. For example, children who travel to school via taxi. We discussed this in the steering group, and we've solved the problem through the allocation of additional funding to address this. We also approached, as I said earlier, additional providers to provide activity targeted for young people with SEND. And the third and final point there is to foster good relationships between people who share a protected characteristic and those who do not. It's implicit in the mixing of children and the defined activities provided. We have made sure that is implicit in the HAF programme. We've ensured access for children from different groups who could enjoy the HAF programme together, therefore taking advice and support as needed.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Lind, do you have a further one?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. In relation to question 4, will the holiday activities and food programme be communicated to the deaf community via VSL video, and will interpreters be provided? My answer hasn't actually been answered, so I will ask again. Please can the Cabinet member confirm that the Council will be communicating with the deaf community using VSL video and that interpreters will be booked for the programme? Thank you.
Councillor Williams.
Thank you. For those young people and families that do require BSL, when they, as I said earlier, when they sign up with the providers, they will be able to ask for that, and that will be provided. And we are actually in the process of making a BSL video to go along with the website on the City Council, so that will be done.
Thank you. I think that concludes R. Shall we move on to S? Alex?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, question S is from Councillor Dinser to Councillor Pearce. How long does it take council services to investigate and respond to reported incidents of fly tipping?
Councillor Dinser, do you have a supplementary?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Pearce, for your response. You described very well in terms of the process that exists for reporting and investigating fly tipping and waste disposal. However, you don't appear to have answered the question. The question was how long, and I'm quite familiar with the description you've made here, because I do deal with PPOs, environmental protection officers, local neighbourhood officers, and doing all the processes that you described here. But the question I asked was how long does it take environmental protection officers services to respond? Now, my own experience is, and I want that confirming, whether that's just wider than my experience, recently some have been waiting 5 or 6 months. Now, could you please respond, not today if you can't, after this event, how long does it take to respond to the Environment Protection Services to investigating the reports made by the public, councillors and neighbourhood officers? Thank you.
Councillor Pearce.
Just one moment, Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Councillor Dinser. We did get there in the end. Yes, by all means, I will do in writing and I will correspond with you by email or by phone. Okay, on that point. Thank you.
Thank you. Question T, Alex?
Question T is from Councillor West to Councillor McChrystal. Please can the Cabinet provide an update on the planned opening of the Moorway Sports Village, and we'll refer that one to the Deputy Leader, I think.
Councillor West, you have a supplementary?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I do. If you can answer, Councillor Holmes, given the fantastic facility that ward councillors were fortunate enough to have a tour of recently is expected to attract visitors from across neighbouring counties, will there be a reduced entrance price for local residents to use the facility?
What a good idea. Councillor Holmes.
I'll defer it to the Cabinet member, but I know that he's working very hard, as are the administration, to work through those details for concessions for local people. Very happy to inform you of those discussions, if you like, in terms of the concessions that may be being discussed, and we'll take it from there.
Thank you, Councillor Holmes. Question you, Alex?
Question U is from Councillor Bonser to Councillor Webb. What action is the council taking to enhance support for people in Derby in need of mental health support?
Welcome, Councillor Bonser, and would you like to put a supplementary?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to Councillor Webb for his reply. I appreciate we might not be able to get an answer tonight, but Councillor Webb mentions in his response the wider partnerships that have been actively involved in developing and supporting mental health services in the city. Could I ask, please, if this includes or will include the Living Well service of comprehensive care for our city, and what resources will be allocated to that if it is included?
Councillor Holmes.
Thank you. I know that Councillor Webb will be very frustrated watching this on YouTube and not being able to give you a comprehensive reply, which I know he would give you. I can't do that tonight, so I'll ensure that himself or an officer gives you a detailed written reply to answer that question.
Thank you.
Thank you. Question V, Alex.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The question is from Councillor Shiraz Khan, who I don't believe is here with us this evening, to Councillor McChrystal again. Please can the Cabinet member provide an update on the Market Hall project?
Is there anybody who wishes to speak for Councillor Khan? Councillor Peatfield.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can you please confirm if there are and assure us that there won't be any further cost increases before the hall is opened?
I'm not aware of any.
Thank you. Question W, Alex.
Question W is from Councillor Lonsdale to Councillor Matthew Holmes. What is the council doing to ensure housing developers are meeting their responsibilities to maintain land and facilities?
Councillor Lonsdale, welcome. And would you like to put a supplementary?
Yes, please. Will you be looking into creating, will you look into creating a list of all these areas that I spoke about? I'm sure it's not an issue for just my ward. Housing developers disappearing after they've sold their homes. It might be useful for councillors to have a list that they can refer to when dealing with residents.
Councillor Holmes.
Yeah, that's something we can certainly look at. I think it would sit firmly with linking into neighbourhood boards to do some of that work for us. But yeah, we'll have a look at that. And if you want to be involved in how we maybe progress that, then my door is open to have a discussion.
Thank you, Councillor Holmes. Question X, Alex.
That question is from Councillor Graves Senior to Councillor Pearce. Has policy been changed or resources reduced in respect of the services responsible for emptying public waste bins?
Councillor Graves, supplementary.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, thank you very much. On the face value, this looks like a very good news story. However, when can we expect this scheme being completed? Summer is the highest use of public bins, so I hope it will not take place outside the summer months.
Councillor Pearce.
Councillor Graves, it's an ongoing process. I do have a list of overflowing bin customer service requests if you'd like to see it. You do say they're daily occurrences. I can guarantee that they're not daily occurrences, and I will send you this form after this meeting. But the ongoing process to have the sensors in the bins is, as I say, ongoing. Thank you.
Thank you. Question Y, Alex.
That question is from Councillor Dinser to Councillor Pearce. Why were highways improvement works identified in last year's schedule for Normanton Ward not completed?
Councillor Dinser, do you have a supplementary?
I do, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Pearce, look, thank you for your response, but I detect a little pattern here. You are again describing what is the process as opposed to answering the question. You say that there's an asset management review process which was started in 2018. We're in 2021. Are we saying that the streets which are named in your response, where residents have complained about the deterioration and them being one of the worst in the city, that those are being ignored and a new list is going to be created? And you mentioned Normanton. My question was for Normanton Ward, not Normanton, because I understand there'll be many more streets if you go wider, in fact, much wider than Normanton Ward. But I'm interested on behalf of the residents of Normanton Ward that I represent, who have raised concerns about some of the poorest streets in the city, and you're telling me in your response that a new asset manager response will be ignoring these streets and a new list will be brought forward which will not have these in there. Why are you ignoring the needs and the requests duly approved, duly signed off by the councillors, by the local officers, neighbourhood officers, and asked of by the residents of Derby in Normanton
Councillor
Ward?
Pearce.
Councillor Dinser, we're not ignoring Normanton Ward, not ignoring any ward. All of the roads and streets that are in the list on there, we're going to be getting the micro asphalting treatment to the roads. It does explain in the reply why that wasn't carried out on those particular roads. We're not ignoring those roads. It's now come to the fact that some of them are going to get a better treatment and that road will last longer in the long run.
When?
I'll come back to you on that.
Question Z, Alex.
Question Z is from Councillor Repton to Councillor Matthew Holmes, and this is: what legal powers does the council hold to protect listed buildings?
Is there somebody who wishes to put a supplementary? Oh, beg your pardon, I didn't see you there, Councillor Repton. I thought you were very quiet.
I'm hard to miss.
Uncharacteristically
or
quiet.
ignore, Mr. Mayor, as you know. I'd like to ask Councillor Holmes, whilst it's true that the owner primarily has responsibility to maintain their building, isn't it also true that the council has a responsibility to this 500-year-old Grade 2 star scheduled monument, which is of local and national interest? And what is the outcome of Ian Fullerger's inquiries, as he told us only last week, to the head of legal services, about what powers the council has and under what circumstances they would enforce those powers to make sure that that building continued to be safe?
Councillor Holmes.
Thank you, Councillor Repton. You're already aware that as a scheduled ancient monument, it is the primary concern of Historic England and their powers rather than council powers. Councillor McChrystal also covered this issue in detail with his response to the public question earlier in the meeting.
Thank you. Question AA, Alex.
The question is from Councillor Lonsdale to Councillor Matthew Holmes again. Can the Cabinet Member provide an update on progress in negotiations with stakeholders for the Kingsway roundabout, and when will local residents be able to... Sorry, an email from Councillor Webb has just obscured my screen. Bear with me one moment. Can the Cabinet Member provide an update on progress in negotiations with stakeholders for the Kingsway roundabout, and when will local residents be able to use the pedestrian crossing?
Councillor Lonsdale, do you have a supplementary?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Graves to Councillor Pearce. BB, Alex.
The question is, can the Cabinet Member ensure local junior football teams are provided with park space for the upcoming season?
Councillor Graves, do you have a supplementary?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for your response. However, I'm extremely disappointed that appointments for two teams, one in Alverston, one in Allington, are being scheduled for September. I hope that you can see that this is not reasonable.
Councillor Pearce.
Totally agree with you, Councillor Graves. Thank you very much for that. Can we work on this after the meeting and get some of these ordered? I've also got some senior teams that I'm sorting out as well. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Question CC, Alex?
Question CC is from Councillor Dinser to Councillor Pearce. Why are so few schemes planned to improve public footpaths in the Derby South constituency?
Councillor Dinser, have you a supplementary?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I have. Councillor Pearce, thank you for your response. I'm afraid once again you have given a description of process and jam tomorrow. Is it true that the only ward in Derby South with works already committed is Chellaston? Is the council now focusing on the only ward in Derby South that has any Conservative councillors left?
Was that Chellaston or Chaddeston? Chellaston. Did you say Chaddeston?
Chellaston, I said.
Chellaston, thank you.
You took me by surprise then, because I know there's none in Chaddeston.
It's Chellaston.
Definitely not Chellaston. I will check that for you after the meeting, Councillor Dins. I will come back to you, and I can always arrange a meeting down at Stores Road with you and go through it with the Highways Department if you so wish.
Thank you. Question DD, Alex?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The final question this evening, Councillor Dinser to Councillor Smale. Why did the council fail to apply for the government's Safer Streets Fund Round 2?
Councillor Dinser, do you have a supplementary?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, if I can get around to sorting the things out. Yes. Thank you, Councillor Smale, for the response. Do you agree with me that the council lost an opportunity to access £500,000 for Derby residents to keep them safe when we failed to apply for the Safer Streets Fund 2 opportunity to apply? And could it be that when there was a Labour Police and Crime Commissioner in post, the council were less keen to work in partnership for the good of the people of Derby?
Councillor Holmes.
No.
That concludes the questions this evening. It was particularly gratifying to hear from the members
Mr. Mayor, there were two aspects to the question. There were two aspects to the question.
Supplementary. You only have one question supplementary to that question, which means we move on to item 9. The next item of business is a minute extract from a meeting of the Audit and Accounts Governance Committee held on the 16th of June 2021. A minute is recommending the annual report of the committee to council. I understand that Councillor Willoughby was originally due to move these minutes, but he's voluntarily absent this evening. Councillor West, as the current chair and the vice chair during the last municipal year, would you like to move them instead?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Moved as printed.
Thank you. Is that seconded? Councillor Hasselgrove, thank you. Those in favour? Any against? That is carried. Now consider the late item that I referred to earlier. This is a minute extract from the Council Cabinet meeting held last Wednesday, which recommends amendments to the Council's Treasury Management Strategy. I've agreed to the item being urgently considered to allow the recommendations contained within the Cabinet report to be progressed expediently. Councillor Ralston, as the Cabinet Member for Finance, will you move the minutes, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Moved as printed.
Is that seconded? Councillor Holmes, thank you. Those in favour? Any against? That is carried. The meat of the evening. Item 10. The next item of business is to consider a report of the Independent Remuneration Panel in respect of its recommendations on councillors' allowances and expenses. will shortly move to a debate on the recommendations and consider the report of the IRP alongside recent recommendations from the Corporate Services Scrutiny Board. Unfortunately, the chair of the Independent Remuneration Panel, Mr. Narinder Sharma, is unwell and has sent his apologies to this evening's meeting. I'd like to place on records my thanks to Narinder and his fellow panellists for the comprehensive report you have produced. We will now debate the recommendations. Councillor Barker, do you wish to introduce that?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I similarly offer my sincere thanks to the chair of the Independent Remuneration Panel, and I wish him well in his recovery as well. I think it's very difficult to, in actual fact, introduce as a councillor a report that's of an independent nature. I'd just like to actually point out to council, who should know, but there are other people listening outside of this chamber, of the process that we go through with this. First and foremost, of course, councillors within this city council are, by virtue of the Local Government Act, responsible for their own allowances, unlike Parliament, who have an independent panel who determine their allowances. We have chosen to, in actual fact, put this into the hands of an independent panel of our own. So therefore, the views and the representations that are put within this paper are those of an independent panel rather than the councillors who are debating it here this evening. And so there's no predetermination. Basically, councillors received this paper at the early part of this week when papers were published, and so therefore they are able to make their own minds up in relation to the content of it. My only job really is to ensure that we point out that there are the recommendations of the panel, and those recommendations include a substantial part of the document given an explanation of how those recommendations have come around. And so it's very difficult to debate the issue without questions being asked of councillors. I will sum up this evening, if there are questions from councillors, the best I can, but it is obviously my interpretation of the views of the independent review panel rather than the views expressed, which would have been expressed by the chairman had he been here. And so really I refer to the appendix which is attached to this. There are 14 recommendations or summary recommendations on part 8 of the paper, and I commend them to the council. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Barker. Members may choose to vote individually on these recommendations or take them as a whole. Can I assume you're all willing to take them as a whole, collectively? Is there anybody who opposes that idea? In which case, that's what we'll do. We'll take them collectively. Separate recommendations of the Scrutiny Board, detailed at Appendix 3, will be dealt with once we've considered the recommendations of the IRP. So I throw it open. Anybody wish to speak on the recommendations of the IRP? Councillor Peatfield.
Okay, we'll try again. I sound like a robot now. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We would like to thank the IRP and our officers for all the work they've done on this. This is always going to be a contentious issue with the public, who we are here to serve. The press and the media are also rightfully interested, and it's difficult to decide your own worth, and it is an unfair burden. In a council with no overall majority, in a city that changes administration and has yearly elections, it becomes a political hot potato.
Government should legislate to take this decision away from us councillors and put it entirely in the hands of an independent panel, similar to what happens with MPs. It may be popular to dismiss this increase, to decline it again and just move on. It may appear prudent, and especially in this difficult time of recovery. However, after 11 years of austerity, there is no right time to review this, and there may never be at this rate. Deferring this again, we believe, will make things worse, not necessarily for current members as much as for members of the future, which we all have a responsibility to attract and support. We know many people across parties have struggled and have either had to leave the role, they've struggled along just about managing, or we've lost some excellent candidates who would have come forward but just couldn't justify it. This can't be a role for the privileged retired on comfortable pensions or those with another source of income. We must have a chamber reflective of all of our city. The basic allowance proposal is sensible. We continue to stand with public sector workers who have been hit the hardest by Tory austerity. Their pay rises have been woeful. The basic allowance increase is only based on the woeful local government increase. It's not inflation busting, and it doesn't cover the years where there was no increase. We stand by all low paid workers, including those in the NHS, and I hope that all the chamber would work with us to rectify that situation rather than defend government policy. And we would just finish by saying that any member currently has the right to refuse all or any part of their allowance. So anyone who may be voting against this today, but hoping that it is approved anyway, may have a personal decision to make. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Carr.
Sorry, my hearing aids have just come out when I took my mask off. I
feel for you, I have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have read this report. I have some experience in reading technical reports in my previous careers. I think it's a very well written report. The arguments are well constructed and well made, and I agree with Councillor Peatfield. I do think it's invidious that we have to go through this routine, and that point is made in the report that this really should be taken out of our hands, but my party will be supporting the recommendations of the IRP. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Holmes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be very brief. Much of what Councillor Peatfield said is absolutely right, and I wholeheartedly agree with. In terms of the issue that we have before us, it is a very difficult one. I would like to say that for me, the focus is on ward councillors delivering good quality support to local residents in their wards. And for me, it's long overdue to see that basic allowance increased. I would certainly like the decision to be, like in Parliament, made externally of a chamber of like this, where we're put in a position where we have to make a decision either way, and it's been a very, very difficult decision over many years. But I've felt strongly in many of those years that the decision should have been to take an increase for various reasons, and it's never going to be an argument we can win with residents really. But what I will say is that ward councillors can work very hard to build up their reputations in their wards and justify that modest allowance. And if the public don't believe that they deliver value, then we have elections to make a change. So I'd like to finally thank the opposition parties as well. I haven't heard from the Reform Group as yet, but obviously the Liberal Democrats and Labour are approaching this in a sensible manner and a mature way. And we welcome that, and we will be voting for this as well. Thank you.
Thank you. In which case, nobody else has raised a hand. Councillor Barker, would you like to move the recommendations of the IRP?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. If you look at page 26 of the bundle, part 8, the summary of the recommendations, there are recommendations 1 to 14. I move them as printed, please.
Is that seconded? Councillor Pearce, thank you. Those in favour? Any against? That is carried. Okay, we'll move on then to the other recommendations that separate recommendations of the Scrutiny Board detailed in Appendix 3. Anybody wish to speak on those? Councillor Peatfield.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would firstly like to just observe that for a gender report to take 4 years to come to full council is sadly telling of the topic. The remuneration report managed to only take 18 months from council to review and back to council and through a pandemic. So I do wonder why a gender report takes so long. This report is the legacy of former Councillor Eldred, who first brought the motion to full council in September 2017. The intention of the task force was to look at the representation of gender with the intention of increasing the diversity of elected representatives within the council. Now, there are many things that stand in the way of women standing to be candidates and councillors. The board has noted that women are far more likely to act as carers, and the Labour Group welcomes their recommendation that dependent carers allowance be raised and that a parental and carers leave policy is implemented. This is, after all, the very reason that Councillor Eldred had to stand down. Being a councillor and a parent or carer currently does not work financially for many women. It is unacceptable that in Derby in 2021, only 25% of councillors are women. And it's unacceptable that over half the wards in Derby have no female representation. We support every recommendation from the Scrutiny Board minutes, especially a council programme to encourage more women to stand. But let's face it, the report does not really go far enough or deep enough into the myriad of reasons why women are put off from entering public life. It doesn't cover the misogyny in the chamber and in political life, such as having our facts and figures questioned, social media abuse, messages between male councillors about keeping us in check, verbal bullying and intimidation in meetings, sexist language to describe us, or repeated suggestions that men write our speeches. It's time to call it out in the chamber, in meetings, in correspondence, social media and in public. It falls on every Derby City Councillor to recognise this behaviour, either in others or in themselves. And I do include myself and my group in that. So please, stop correcting our language, undermining us, questioning our intelligence. Please don't interrupt us. Don't rephrase our words and take credit when you repeat them. Don't tell women they're too loud, too aggressive, too angry, too opinionated or too much, because it takes all of these things just to be heard around here. So please don't criticise us for that. Only when this behaviour stops will enough women feel safe enough to stand to be candidates and councillors. We need them to stand so that our residents are equally represented, and so that with strength in numbers, we can challenge and remove this behaviour in politics and change the system that allows it to happen. We need more women councillors so that together we can make our voices heard. Our passion, our anger, our caring, it will all resonate through our policies and create a better place to live for everyone. The Labour Group supports all these recommendations and more. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Peatfield. I hesitate after that to ask you a question or question you, but are you moving that? Tell me what you are moving, please.
We move the recommendations, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Is that seconded?
Point of order, Chair. If we did adopt these recommendations, they would be in conflict slightly with the recommendation we just agreed about the salary of councillors. The recommendation in this item, resolved item 4, would be 11,336, whereas we momentarily agreed 11,523. I would suggest for the consistency that figure be changed within that, and
not,
so that
not quite a point of order, but I'll ask Emily Feenan to explain.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think Councillor Peatfield realises that it's actually recommendations 1 to 3, and that recommendation 4 is now superfluous to requirements. Yes, thank you. We do need a seconder, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah. Do I have a seconder for Councillor Peatfield? Thank you. Councillor Dinser, seconded. Do you wish to speak now or reserve your right to speak later?
Reserve my right to speak.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Skelton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was one of the people on that panel, along with Councillor Eldred. And as Councillor Peatfield says, Councillor Eldred was certainly very determined, very committed to achieving what is before us now. And I'm sure she's most likely watching online and smiling, I hope. So I heartily believe that this is the right way forward for us as a council. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Any other speakers? In which case we come to Councillor Dinser, seconder.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I won't take much more time. I think Councillor Peatfield eloquently put the case for these recommendations, and I wholeheartedly, and I think the whole chamber will wholeheartedly, I'm sure, support Councillor Peatfield's very valid, very eloquent, and very passionate comments on the report and its recommendations, and we should take these forward and to make sure that we create an environment where women feel comfortable, safe to stand as councillors for elected office to serve the people of Derby. Thank you.
Councillor Peatfield, do you wish to sum up? Thank you. In which case we'll move to the vote. Those in favour of the recommendation? Any against? I think that's unanimous in favour, and that motion is carried. Thank you. The next item then is item 11, urgent non-executive decisions made by the Chief Executive. We now move to that, detailing any urgent decisions made under his delegated authorities since the last meeting of Council. Councillor Barker, as Cabinet Member for Governance, will you move the recommendations in the report, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Moved as printed, please.
Is that seconded? Councillor Holmes. Anybody else wish to speak on it? Thank you. Those in favour? Any against? That is carried. Thank you. That brings us to item 12 to 15, which are the notices of motion. We have 4 notices of motion received prior to the meeting and circulated with your agenda documents. The first one, item 12, is on support for business improvement districts, and it's to be moved by Councillor Peatfield and seconded by Councillor Dinser. Councillor Peatfield.
Oh my word. It doesn't want me to speak, and for that reason, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to withdraw this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. I have to put that to the meeting. Is everybody happy that is withdrawn? Thank you. Anybody against? In which case that is withdrawn. We're doing great strides. Item 13, Derby children and young people deserve better, to be moved by Councillor Martin and seconded by Councillor Hazelgrave. Councillor Martin isn't here, so...
Mr. Mayor, I'm stepping in for Councillor Martin with your gracious acceptance.
Okay, is somebody going to second? Councillor Dinser was second, thank you. Councillor Hazelgrave, then, would you introduce this to us? Thank you.
Before I start, I'll just echo the fact that it's nice to see Phil O'Brien among us this evening, attending to you so attentively, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, fellow councillors, the very fact that we are all ex officio corporate parents should secure unanimous support for this motion. We have the role, through this privileged position, to be the advocates for all that is best for our looked after children. This motion calls for measures which would help to redress the repetitive discontinuity of all pupils' education over the past 18 months in England, and so, if heeded by central government, will benefit greatly all our LACs, wherever they may be placed in this country. The vast majority of our LACs are historically low achievers and throughout their journey through schooling experience significant and persistent barriers through their circumstances to engagement with their learning. The lengthy and successive ad hoc school closures have created for many of our LACs what will have been an insurmountable barrier to effective teaching and learning with patchy, if any, progress. A high quality, appropriately funded 5-year-long catch-up curriculum is essential to get them on the right path. All I have said above is of course relevant equally to all pupils, not just our LACs, since all have experienced significant prolonged gaps in their learning and their acquisition of skills. Mr. Mayor, I chose one primary school in the city at random and looked up on the government website what catch-up funding they have been allocated this summer. The number on roll for the school is 375 and they received as catch-up funding £12,500, which equates to £33.33 per pupil, a figure very close to the per capita funding quoted in the motion itself. It won't go far, to say the least. It must be brought to councillors' attention that the overall state of schools in England's finances is really already pretty poor and is worsened throughout the COVID crisis. Schools have reportedly lost on average £60,000 over the last year through having to engage more supply teachers, the loss of letting fees, other sources of income and other pressures. That's an average, so large secondary schools will have lost considerably more than 60,000. To add to this, schools will be collectively losing out on as much as £124 million this financial year as a result of the government's change to the way it allocates pupil premium funds this year, described by some as a stealth cut. The work over several years of the Opportunities Area programme has brought undoubted but modest benefits to the city, in which historically educational outcomes have been below the norm. The greatest benefits would have been for our younger pupils, as the effects of the work have had a cumulative effect on their school careers as they progress through it. I very much fear that the effects of the COVID crisis on our children's schooling have been to nullify many of the gains made, and one pleasing trend in recent years is that Key Stage 2 outcomes have been in the main improving. In short, children are going into our secondary schools in Derby better equipped to access and get the most out of their lessons, which in turn should have led to better post-16 exam results across the city. Please remember that the production line in the educational industry is very long, taking over 11 years from start to finish. But we cannot and must not be satisfied and accept that Derby is a social mobility cold spot. And the only way we can turn that educational tanker around is by a high-quality 5-year strategy for pandemic measures in education at all key stages. So let us turn to what the government has come up with as a support package. There was a review undertaken by Sir Kevin Collins, the government's Education Recovery Commissioner, and he was reported to have called for spending in the region of 15 billion. The government decided on a figure around 1.4 billion, at which point Sir Kevin resigned, warning he did not believe, and I quote, credible that a successful recovery can be achieved with a programme of support of this size, and that the government had taken a half-hearted approach. Is 15 billion needed or 1.4 billion needed? Who are we to believe? Are we to believe an expert in the matter, the former government commissioner? Are we to believe 89% of head teachers in the NAHT? Or are we to believe a Secretary of State for Education and Skills whose background outside of politics was in the fireplace sales industry? I know whom I would support. I ask you to call on Gavin Williamson through this motion to fund Derby and the whole of England to the originally posited funding level. The third resolution of this motion recognises that the Council needs to know about the quality and impact of funded catch-up tutoring, the numbers of pupils involved, and how many hours that involvement entailed. Also, a logical and necessary addition to the data collection would be the views of the recipients of this work, the pupils, and I would expect that this should also be considered contemporarily by Voices in Action. I implore you to support this element of the motion with a strong suggestion that when meaningful data has been collected and both processed and evaluated, this could become an item on the agenda as early as possible in this civic year for the CYP Scrutiny Board, who could in turn report to full council. Mr. Mayor, we are dealing here with a very high stakes matter concerning the future welfare and prosperity of Derby and its residents. We surely, in all political groups, have a vision of Derby having a well-educated, highly skilled and adaptable workforce which is homegrown and ripe and ready to take advantage of whatever the future presents as economic opportunities. Indeed, we won't attract new businesses if they don't have the confidence that this is evident. We may have differing views on how to achieve this, but what the city's education industry needs now to achieve this vision is a serious and significant long-term settlement for catch-up funding, and this motion calls for that. Please support our schools and our children and young people. To conclude, Mr. Mayor, we solely as corporate parents should be supporting this motion. We must always, as councillors, support all parents who care of children and young people currently in education in the city. There are deep citywide inequalities in educational outcomes related to socio-economic backgrounds, and this affects every ward in the city to a greater or lesser extent. Schools have taken successive hits to their budgets during the pandemic and are still facing significant budgetary pressures. Some children and their schools will miss out this year in eligibility for pupil premium funding. The government some time ago identified the city as needing an educational opportunities area board to tackle this and other issues. There is a blindingly obvious need for a 5-year substantial fund for the economic pandemic recovery measures in education, both nationally and in Derby. The presently planned government budget for this just doesn't cut it in the eyes of those who know the extent and depth of the problem, and it cannot deliver on its premise. The council has a responsibility to know what is going on with whatever funded programmes or courses are provided in the city and whether they are effective, cost effective and seen as relevant and helpful by the young people involved. Mr. Mayor, fellow councillors, do the right thing for Derby, its teachers, its young people and their families, and support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hazelgrave. Councillor Dinser, do you wish to speak now or reserve your right?
Mr. Mayor, I reserve the right to speak later. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lind.
Hi. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My group support this motion and the recommendations that is put forth. However, we would like a small amendment to be made to the recommendations on point 3. Don't know if Alex is going to put that up. So that motion will be to add into point 3 that feedback is to be presented to the Children and Young People's Overview and Scrutiny Board, please.
Can we just pause while that's circulated? Thank you.
Councillors, we're unable to display the amendment on the screen, but I have just emailed it to you all, so you should be in your inboxes currently.
So just to clarify, that is to add in to be presented to the Children and Young People's Overview and Scrutiny Board, if that's helpful. Thank you.
Is that seconded? Councillor Skelton, thank you. Has everybody got a copy? I haven't yet. There we go. Okay, thanks. Right. So everybody got a copy? Good. Councillor Lind, would you like to propose your amendment then?
Yes, I would like to propose as read. Thank you.
Councillor Skelton, do you wish to speak now or reserve your right?
I can reserve my right.
Of course. Councillor Williams.
Thank you. Just on the amendment there, I just would like to point out, I'm not going to suggest voting against it, but I just would like to point out that schools already do have to publish the details of their catch-up provision on their own website, and that this addition to this will be an extra burden on the team that already works with all of our schools in terms of getting that. So I would be asking to give some time and leeway to find out if that team can actually spare the capacity to do that. But anybody can have a look on the school websites and have a look at what their catch-up plans are. We've already got some amazing ones that we've seen already coming through. So please do go and have a look at that. But I would please ask council to give me and the teams some leeway on trying to look and see what resources we can do. And I don't mean financial resources, I mean time implication resources for that team, which is quite a small team.
Thank you. Any other speakers on the amendment? Councillor Heslop.
Mr Mayor, I fully support the amendment as proposed by Councillor Lind. Indeed, I alluded to that in a different form of words maybe in my speech proposing this motion. And I do agree with Councillor Williams that it clearly will be more of a burden on staff to collate that information, but I do think it should be available in a summative form. And whether that takes a little bit longer to do in an efficient way and to accurately reflect what is going on around the city, I don't think anybody's going to have a problem with that, as long as that timescale doesn't mean that there's some slippage in terms of how we might react to it.
Thank you. Councillor Skelton, do you wish to add anything?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor. If we could move to the vote.
Thank you. Those in favour of the amendment? Anybody against? So the amendment is carried. We're now debating the substantive motion as amended. Councillor Williams.
Thank you. I shall try not to jig along to the music that I have to accompany me on this. First of all, I would like to say it has not been unknown for me, either in this chamber or outside of this chamber, to go against my own party in national government, and I will be doing so tonight, because I absolutely agree that what Kevin Collins proposed was the right amount that we need, and I'm happy to support this motion and the amended motion. What I would like to say is that there is no doubt that lockdown has interrupted children's learning. Some of this can be recovered through the COVID catch-up, and as I just said, there are some fabulous examples of this already on the school websites, and some very innovative ways in which the schools are doing that. But there is also change needed in the secondary schools in the Key Stage 4 curriculum, and that is just as much of a change as needed, as well as this catch-up COVID funding. This will take a couple of years to come through, because Key Stage 4, as we all know, the curriculum is locked in. But I will say to everybody here tonight and those listening that I will continue to lobby the Minister for those changes that are needed in that Key Stage 4 curriculum. In terms of our looked after children, can I just assure everybody, as your corporate parents, that during the pandemic, our virtual school and the team there have been in constant contact with our looked after children. And indeed in 2019, as those people that are on the corporate parenting board will know, the looked after children's outcomes have been the best that they have ever been. Now, I'm not saying that we should all stand here and applaud. What I'm saying is that has been a really good outcome for those young people, but we can and we must do better. In terms of what we can do as corporate parents, of course, can I say to you all, being a governor at a school is both a very rewarding but very challenging role that I know a number of us here tonight do. And I would encourage anybody that is interested in working with our schools to become a governor and to try and influence some of the outcomes and make sure that they get better here in the city of Derby. I would like to take this opportunity to say a massive thank you and to pay big tribute to all of our schools, to all of our partners, whether it be local authority schools or trusts or multi-academy trusts. To also say thank you to all our parents and carers who have stepped into that teaching role over the last 18 months. But to also say thank you to my director, my head of service and the small team that we have here at the council, because they have worked tirelessly, working with all the schools to make sure that the ever-changing, daily changing, minute changing, second changing notifications and guidance that has come out is effectively done throughout the schools. We have worked in great partnership throughout this pandemic and we will continue to do so. And the Opportunity Board led us down that road of working in true partnership, and we will continue to do that. And I know that my opposition members, both Councillor Hazelgrave and Councillor Lind, will support me in terms of working in partnership together to make sure that the outcomes of our children and young people get better and better. So thank you to all of those that have put those efforts into it during the pandemic. And I'm happy to say that on this occasion, my group will be supporting the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dinser, do you wish to speak now?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm pleased to hear that the resolution, the motion proposed by the Labour group has support across the chamber. There is no better investment than in our children, because we do know they are our future. As Councillor Hazelgrave said, 11 years is required of input at the highest level to produce our children to be best able to meet the challenges, meet their opportunities academically or through other skills in their future lives. And the recommendations here with the added amendment is the least we can do to act and to submit to government our views, cross-party views of what we need to do to allow our children in Derby and across the country to catch up from the impact, the negative impact of COVID-19 on their welfare, their mental state, and their academic lack of opportunity for all our children, those in need and those who may not be under special needs. So I welcome the support of cross-party support of this, and I welcome the eloquent proposal of the resolution made by Councillor Paul Hazelgrave, and I hope we will have a unanimous support for this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hazelgrave, if you'd like to sum up.
Well, Mr. Mayor, all I'd say is I do hope we meet here more often if I'm proposing or end up proposing motions. Collective wisdom's broken out, and I would just respectfully ask to move to the vote.
Those in favour? Anybody against? That is unanimous and a very pleasing result, and of course is carried. Thank you. The next item is number 14, Allestree Golf Course and Hall, to be moved by Councillor Skelton and seconded by Councillor Repton. Councillor Skelton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Like plenty of people, I'm not happy at the prospect of losing Allestree Golf Course forever, especially as it's one of the few courses designed by Harry S. Colt that remains largely unaltered since the time he created it. Generally, the council's aim should always be to ensure that its assets are giving maximum benefit to its citizens, whether that's in terms of financial returns or indeed social returns. And sadly, we appear in this situation that it's not the case. Early on in the process, the decision was taken by the council to concentrate on getting the hall sold, which, since it's been obviously on the market, so to speak, for a long time, in one sense is understandable. But the problem is, with doing that, the golf course was treated like an afterthought. The true value of the course was not really appreciated by some, and I think this explains why no publicity was done by the council in the specialist golfing media. This decision has proved, I believe, to be a strategic error of judgment. The afterthought mentality has led to inaccuracies and omissions in the information used for decision making. It's rather like the painting the orrery being described as being painted by just some guy from Derby. You wouldn't say that, as it would be totally undervaluing the skills of Joseph Wright. Similarly, some people are still refusing to acknowledge the true value of Alistry Golf Course in terms of it being designed by the world-famous Harry S. Colt. Since the Save Alistry Golf Course group have put articles into the specialist golf media, serious interest has been generated from organisations keen to run the golf course. And when I say serious interest, I mean money as well as inclination to do so. One of them, the Ian Woosnam Golf Academy, featured in the local media last week. In fact, they sent their business plan to 2 council cabinet members on the 28th of May this year. So I was somewhat surprised to hear from Councillor Rulstone that no contact had been made. That's just absolutely not the case. But it does obviously beg the question that the 2 cabinet members concerned obviously didn't pass this information on to council officers who could then have dealt with it. The media response to the council in the article in the local press was to say that the council just isn't looking anymore for any bids for the golf course. That's it, finished, Schluss. The question has to be asked, why not? Why is the cabinet happy to see a council asset just go to rack and ruin rather than generating an income for the council? It absolutely beggars belief that there are 4 organisations keen to put in bids and yet the council aren't interested. We know obviously earlier on there was mistakes made in where the publicity was made, that such that the people, the organisations that are now interested didn't pick up that information at all. But now they have done, and now they're asking, in fact they're pleading with the council to take notice. I know for a fact that Ian Woosnam himself has visited Alistry Golf Course at least twice with his team, and they are still interested. So I cannot understand why it is the council is just so negative about the whole thing. Meanwhile, it's almost 2 years ago that the preferred bidder for Alistry Hall was chosen. But as we all know, they have yet to sign on the dotted line, and the council has been very patient with them. But I do think a time frame does need to be agreed when this will happen. If circumstances are such that it can't be signed in the very near future, then I think an honest discussion has to take place. My main aim in bringing this motion is to make sure the council gets the best out of the assets for the benefit of Derby residents. And that is what we as councillors are supposed to do. And as you'll see later on in the motion, I refer to Marketing Derby. And involving Marketing Derby actually means that the council avails itself of their skills that they have in bringing regeneration opportunities to fruition. And I think they could really assist the council in doing something really special for Derby. And so I ask councillors to support this motion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Repton, do you wish to speak now or reserve your right?
I'll speak now, Mr. Mayor. A number of reasonable questions were asked by members of the public earlier. Unfortunately, the answers were woefully insufficient. Councillor Ralston talked about principle. Whatever happened to the principle that this administration pledged of openness and transparency? Openness and transparency. There's absolutely none, I would suggest, with regard to the matter that we are debating this evening. Why would such a prestigious organisation as the Ian Woosman Golf Academy want to take on Alistair Golf Course if it was not viable? This administration seems determined to not even consider bids such as this and the other three that councillors have mentioned this evening. Earlier I quoted Keynes, the famous American economist, when the facts change, I change my mind. Why won't you change your mind on this, Councillor Ralston? Since the Alistair Golf Course had put its articles in a specialist golfing magazine, we know that Ian Woosman, Golf Academy for one, came forward, and it seems that they sent their business case to two cabinet members, Councillor McChrystal and Councillor Pearce. Yet Councillor Ralston said there's been no approach at all. What is the truth of this matter? We have two different sets of facts to go on this evening, or two different assertions which are contradictory. I would urge the Council, even at this late stage, in the interest of openness and transparency, to talk to Ian Woosman and his company, to talk to the other bidders. At the very least, you owe that to the people of Derby. You owe that to the thousands of people who've signed the petition to keep this historic golf course open in the city. And I would urge all councillors to support this motion this evening. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Ralston.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will stand for this one. I have to say that this whole motion is shrouded in misinformation. Carries on from that has been put out there by the Save Alistair Park. In their, Councillor Repton refers to their petition. In their petition it says, without the golf, the parkland will turn into long grass and shrub and will no longer be able to be enjoyed by walkers and residents. Absolute rubbish. Loads more people, absolutely hundreds more people have been enjoying that park, and I will come on to the major comments that I've had from them. They've also said within that petition, long-serving ground staff will be kicked out of their jobs. No staff have lost their jobs. They've all been redeployed within this council. So not just to top off the misinformation that we're getting here, we're now being told that approaches were made to the cabinet members. That is not a formal way of approaching a council to take on a council asset. There is a process that we have to go through. Now, the process started back in September 2019. The Cabinet authorised the undertaking of a consultation. The consultation of the AOIs was done from the 16th of December. From the 23rd of March, the closure of the consultation was made, but we hit COVID. We hit an epidemic, and therefore we extended that. And from the 27th up to the 27th of August, the Cabinet meeting showed the direction of travel of the golf course was there was no viable bids. That is the facts. It is not a viable golf course in its own asset. It's been clear from the outset, even from our own figures, it cost nearly £250,000 in expenditure to run that golf course, and numerous attempts were made to make that a viable asset. In fact, the golf rounds were increased from 13,000 up to the 16,000. But guess what? It still needed a subsidy of £120,000 from this council for a few golfers. The reality is that there are 18 golf courses within 20 minutes of this Alistair golf course. Alistair Park golf course itself, which obviously no longer exists. There is Derby Golf Centre, Bredsall Priory Golf Club, Mickletover Golf Club and Sinfin, all within 5 to 10 minutes drive. And there are many others. I actually took the time to speak to many of those and to look at all the opportunities that are there for young golfers. And as I said earlier, I spoke to the academy at Morley Hayes, and he indeed said that he himself had looked at this asset and found that it was not viable for an academy because it does not have the facilities needed to run an academy, which include a driving range and other facilities. More misinformation. It's claimed, and I say claimed, that it is a Harry S. Colt course. In fact, I did some research, and the only validation and facts that I can find is that it indeed was opened as a golf club in 1930 as the Derbyshire Golf Club. When the course first reopened, but then shortly there was a war. And in fact, the park was requisitioned by the army for the war effort, and they actually practiced throwing grenades. Now, even if it can be evidence that this was a golf course, let's be honest, how much of that golf course remains, having been thrown grenade after grenade after grenade on that course? There's lots of other information that I want to go through, but all I can say clearly is that we followed the process. I've gone through those that did interested expression of interest, and it was clear that they did not meet. Now, in January, the Cabinet agreed not to proceed with the Hardy bid, and we also proposed that any other choirs connection that they were not to proceed with any other inquiries. We have to make a decision, and we did that. Now, I'm going to go back to the residents and what the comments that I received, because ultimately we need to accept that the golf course is closed, and many residents' comments have come in, and they personally agree that it's critical to support our biodiversity and climate change agenda. I'm amazed that the Labour group and the Liberal Democrats haven't even thought about this as we approach our next motion. In fact, the next motion is being debated here tonight is just about those things. Now, here are some of the quotes that I've received. I firmly am of the opinion that the course should not be reopened as it's been proposed. The land should be rewilded and as wildflower meadowland. And that was from a gentleman called Bill Grange. I apologise. I wish it was from Bill Gates. The next one that I have is from a Linda Crowder, and it says, I just wanted to say how wonderful it is to have the Alistry Park on our doorstep, and it's brilliant now that it's made over from the golf course to parkland. My husband and I regularly enjoy the walks with the dog, and we really appreciate the work that the council does to maintain it. I hope it can be preserved as parkland for decades to come. I'm sure it will have lots of complaints about losing the golf course, but I wanted to balance those up and say how much of the space is appreciated, especially during lockdown. The third one says, the hall has suffered sad
Councillor
decline.
Ralston, you have exceeded your 5 minutes. I can't see a clock, unfortunately. But if you have not a lot to say, I'm going to put it to the meeting that we let Councillor Ralston have another minute. Is anybody objecting? Please raise your hand if you refuse to allow Councillor Ralston
It's
to
just
finish.
one more resident comments, and it would be a shame not to hear it, Mr. Mayor.
There's only a minority have refused, so please
Thank
continue,
you.
but please wrap up.
The golfers may be loud, but they are a minority, and reopening the course may result in minority benefit. By contrast, allowing the course to naturalise benefits not just all current residents, but future ones too, via a healthier, more survivable environment. Indeed, anything to improve the local environment helps to improve the national and world environment, and therefore benefits the world's populations. Politicians locally and nationally have arduous duty of making sometimes difficult decisions for the greater good. Please ask yourselves, which is most worthy? A group of golfers, or too few to make this course financially viable, or the battle against climate change and biodiversity loss, which is already having a serious negative impact on life and will have an even greater impact on future generations.
Thank you. I must ask
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
and thank you to the council for being tolerant there. I will try and do that very rarely, but I think it does make sense to do it occasionally, and I did put that to you, and a majority were in favour of extending it. Councillor Barker.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Ralston has grasped a nettle on this one, only just having recently taken over the portfolio which included this issue. I, for one, was one of the people who, one of the councillors who made the decision back in January of this year, having lived with it for over a year. And I think that's what needs to be said here. This started in November of 2019. We had to make a decision back end of last year for the simple fact is we needed some of the buildings that the golf club were using, which was part of the sale of the hall. I heard it mentioned earlier about the sale of the hall. It has been elongated for the simple fact is it is in a derelict state of repair, and basically the purchaser needs to secure some planning permission before they obviously sign on the dotted line. If it was you that was doing it, if it was me that was doing it, of course we would want that firming up to start with. Can I talk about the Harry S. Cole course? As you've heard said, the course was first and foremost a 9-hole course in the early 1900s. Then there was the war. It became, after that, an 18-hole course. Nothing to do with Harry S. Cole. It was an 18-hole course. And originally it wrapped round the, my understanding is from Councillor Webb, who must have been around at the time, it wrapped around the course. It wrapped around the lake. Now, it doesn't wrap around the lake now, so it's altered yet again. So it bears no resemblance to the RAS course that it originally was. And that's been a misnomer that was put out by those opposing the closure of the course. Similarly, they did apply to the Historic England for designation of that course. That was refused by Historic England because it had no significance in relation to a Harry S. Cole course. It was refused. So that knocks that out of sync altogether. Basically, the building itself is purchased. It will be signed on the dotted line once the planning is sorted out. What the course needs, if it was ever put back to a course, is it needs a golf club of some form. It needs a new car park of some form. Are the planning committee of this city going to do that? It's green belt. It's a green belt site. And so therefore, are they going to allow building on there? I rest my case. It's closed. It should stay closed.
Thank you. Councillor Peatfield.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to raise a point of order. I understand that you departed from the procedurals, Mr. Mayor, there. Rather than that rarely happening, as you suggested, if procedure rules are indeed at your discretion, rather than to be followed, then I look forward to all of us being awarded 6 minutes to speak. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Noted, Councillor Peatfield. Thank you. And I'm sure if you do a bombshell speech like Councillor Ralston, I will be very considerate. Councillor Graves.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Hardly a bombshell speech, I would have to say.
I was thinking of the grenades. Is it?
Oh, the grenades. I see the grenades. Yes, I've often seen grenades on Elstree Park. It's they're obviously there all the time. We actually go and have a look just to see them explode. Mr. Mayor, I'm not going to speak very long, but the first thing I noticed from the speeches is that we don't seem to be valuing cabinet members. When I say we, I think the administration doesn't value cabinet members. They don't value cabinet members because if somebody approaches a cabinet member, that's not an approach, apparently. It's just an email. Okay? Now, either cabinet members are doing their job properly and they are accepting things from people saying, this is a good idea, what do you think? Or they're not. You've just voted yourselves a very big pay rise. For what reason? So you can not value yourselves. I find that quite interesting. But Mr. Mayor, it makes me wonder why the council, and when I say the council, I mean the officers, are adamant that they won't look at this proposal, or anybody that wants to bring a proposal to the council to make things better for people in Derby. I don't understand why there's this resistance. Why not look at it and say, actually, we've looked at it, but it's a load of rubbish. But you haven't. You haven't brought any arguments to this council chamber, and all the questions that have been asked. Not one single argument to say the proposal they've brought forward is the wrong thing to do because you haven't got any reasons. So it just makes people wonder, why are you representing what the officers are saying, that we shouldn't do this? The officers have cut it off, and that in itself causes suspicion. Now, Councillor Barker is also used to people being suspicious of him. You know, you've only got to look about the issues on the market hall. So it's very interesting that when we have issues like this, there is suspicion when there's a pushback, rather than let's talk about it, let's have a listen, and let's see what can come of it. Now, they also talk about the building. Now, I remember being a cabinet member many years ago under a different political party, and Alistry Hall was a problem then. It's been a problem for decades. So you know, it doesn't matter if we're going to wait a few more months, or maybe 6 months, it depends how long it takes to look at somebody's other proposal, whether we take a little bit extra time. It doesn't matter. It's been there for decades. It's been a problem for decades. Let's not use that as a reason why we shouldn't do it. And let's not use grenades as a reason why we shouldn't actually look at new proposals. So, what I want to know from the administration here tonight, Mr. Mayor, is where is the vision from the Conservative Party, the current administration? You know, Alistry Hall and Alistry Golf Club could be a brilliant facility. It could be an absolutely brilliant facility if somebody comes in and invests in that area. We've been looking for investment in that area. Now, when we talk about suspicion, people start putting things around like maybe they want to hold it back so that they can sell it for housing, and then your meadows have gone. You know, you don't know. We don't know what's going in the future, because it's a very valuable piece of land for housing. We all know it's in Alistry. You know, houses in Alistry go for a lot of money. So it is valuable in that respect. But I personally feel it's more valuable as a golf course, and I'd like to see golfers of all ages going through Alistry Golf Course and playing golf and making it a very valuable asset for the city of Derby. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Holmes.
Just on that point, Mr. Mayor, housing will not happen, cannot happen. Can we just put that one to bed, please? Housing will not appear on Alistry Golf Course.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor. He cannot say that at this stage.
Yes, I can. Yes,
he cannot
I can.
say that because
Yes,
we have a local plan
Point of order.
that changes on an annual basis.
Graves.
I am telling you, housing will not be built on Alistry Park. It will not be, Councillor.
Thank you. Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Oops, chair nearly fell down. When people refer to a business case, I would expect PowerPoint presentations. Do you agree, Councillor Repton? I would expect vast swathes of paperwork to go through. Don't you agree, Councillor Repton? Don't you agree, Councillor Repton? I was sent an email. Thank you, Councillor Graves. I was sent an email. Can you let me please carry on without interrupting? You seem to have Tourette's, I think. I'm sure you do. Right. I received an email. I've just put it onto a Word document, 252 words, and that includes 2 or 3 things that he didn't really need to put in it. I read exactly the same on that in the Derby Telegraph 2 days before he sent that email. That is not a business case. That is telling us about the Ian Woosnam Golf Academy, which doesn't exist other than at a golf club in Sandbach. Just Google it. Just Google it. It's ever so easy. I've just done it in the last 5 minutes. Ever so easy. It's run by a company called RM Estates, which is run by an ex-Ryder Cup player. Nothing to do with Ian Woosnam. Okay? I've got an email. That's all I had. I did not have a business case, so we can forget about that straight away. Thank you. I'll pass the email on. No problem at all. I don't need to. It was all public knowledge. It was all public knowledge in the Derby Telegraph 2 days before. Thank you.
Not have a one-to-one. Are there any other speakers before I go back to Councillor Skelton? Councillor Skelton, would you like to sum up?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think words like misinformation need to be very carefully used. I'm sort of thinking now, do I believe a councillor, or do I about investigation of the facts of the past, or do I believe someone who is a professional investigator? I think the latter. All the people that she has said again and again, they quoted their delight that the golf course is no longer in operation. Sure, we all know that some people don't like golf, and from the occasional balls that will go astray, that happens. It's I do feel that I know there are issues up at with some people at Allestree. I would be quite grateful if you didn't try and barrack me, Councillor Ralston. Thank you very much. So the assertions that Councillor Ralston makes are quite frankly just her opinions. And I think by her saying that, oh yes, it cannot be run by anybody, it cannot be made to be run or profitable by anybody, is again just her opinion. She doesn't know what the financial background is, the financial assets available to a particular bidder are.
Point of interest, Mr. Mayor, if I may, just in relation to the question around, I do not know the assets of the company that have made inquiries. I have done extensive research on Companies House, and I can assure you that the Woosnam Academy one, the assets that are available to him is £2,500.
That is just in a particular company. You don't know who are the people, who they are going to be collaborating with. In fact, they could be forming a new company, which you know nothing about. So, while you have partial knowledge, you have to accept that is partial knowledge. There is no harm in the council actually starting to have a reasonable discussion with people to actually discover, dig deep, and ask the people, instead of making assertions about people without even asking them to speak or asking them questions about it. So I think that it would be perfectly reasonable to speak to, in fact, all four of the people who are organisations that are keen to put in bids. We owe it to people of Derby to actually, for want of better words, sweat the assets that we do have. Councillor Ralston also, seems to be so very, very concerned now about the environment. But golf courses can and are, particularly in the parts between the actual manicured areas, shall I say, can be made to be extremely wildlife friendly. There is no problem in doing that. So to try and say that golf courses are some sort of barren place.
I'm afraid your time is up, Councillor Skelton.
Could you give me one sentence, Mr. Mayor?
I can hardly refuse.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I would just like councillors to let's explore this opportunity. The worst thing we could do is to just shut our minds and shut the door on anybody who wants to do anything good in our city. And I don't want us to do that. I want us to be open and welcoming to people who want to come in and better our city. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Skelton. Those in favour of the motion as printed? How many is that? 15. Those against? 11. 15 for, 11 against. The motion is carried. We move on then to item 15, alterations to the Wildlife and Countryside Act, to be moved by Councillor Carr and seconded by Councillor Nater, who isn't here, so presumably somebody else is going to do that. Councillor Skelton, thank you. Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Let's hope this debate will be a little more decorous than the last one. First, let me declare an interest. I am and have been for many, many years a member of the Derby Wildlife Trust. Now, most of what I would like to say is probably can be distilled from the printed motion, so I will be brief because it's gone 8 o'clock and it's a very hot night. The 1981 Act does require to be reviewed every 5 years. Now, the current proposals for the review have not been consulted by anyone. They've been made by DEFRA without any kind of consultation whatsoever, and a lot of the proposals for amending that Act will be quite damaging for things like white clawed. Oh, that reminds me, to my undying shame, I have to admit that when I was a teenager, I used to catch white clawed crayfish in Markeaton Brook. They're now a very, very rare species, but we'll lose protection under some of these proposals, along with things like red kites and the buzzards that I now have nested near me and so on. So these proposals will not be helpful to the wildlife. We've made a lot of strides in recent years in reintroducing species and getting them. You know, there used to be 1 or 2 red kites in Wales. Now they're all down the M40 corridor and so on. So I do not wish to lose those protections. And therefore, I would like, as the council, unanimously to support this motion, please, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I'm sorry, I was being given a constitutional pass.
That's fine.
I haven't lost you.
I'm hoping for unanimous support for this motion, which is simply requesting DEFRA to have another look at their proposals. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Skelton, do you wish to speak now or reserve your right?
I'll reserve my right, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Pearce.
I'll stay seated for this. I won't shout at you, Mike. As custodians of the city's fantastic parks, green spaces and local nature reserves, we as a council have a duty of care to the wonderful wildlife in our communities. That commitment is shown, for example, by the close work with community-led groups, such as the many Friends of Parks groups in the city and other volunteer-based groups to enhance our parks and the biodiversity they cultivate. This council, as a motion suggests, are working on a biodiversity plan, which all members have an opportunity to engage in and to ensure that this plan is engaged across the city with all its stakeholders. I open up and I would expect those proposing this motion understand that this council as an organisation are obligated to protect vulnerable species before numbers decline to the point where they are at threat of extinction, and we do all we possibly can to safeguard the wildlife in this city where practicable. We will be supporting this motion.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Okay. Councillor Skelton, you have... Oh, Councillor Olsen, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm really pleased to see that we are, the Liberal Democrat group is bringing such fantastic motions about our wildlife and the Countryside Act. And actually, it would be, we could go one step further here, actually. If we looked at places, I don't know, like what was the Alistair Golf Course, for example, we could look at rewilding it, or even the Queen's Canopy for her celebrationary year. We could look at creating a canopy of forest, a Derby forest, which would be fantastic for the wildlife of this city. And in order to do that, we'd have to progress through certain processes and move on and look at other alternatives rather than looking backwards at history and the things that will support the minority people of people and actually look at our future. So I would just like to say absolutely agree with this wholeheartedly, and we could go one step further and let's work at the options that we could look at for green spaces around the city that we could really work on and make the wildlife even more diverse. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? In which case, Councillor Skelton, you wish to speak now.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If Councillor Nater were here, some of you know he is very keen on tree planting and biodiversity that can be created as well. Obviously, once you have trees, the other species that live alongside those. And we don't need to just pick particular areas of the city. This needs to be done everywhere in the city. And everybody can do their part, just in even their own back garden, to help increase biodiversity and diversity in wildlife and create better habitats for wildlife. But I'm glad that, as far as I know, that everybody is intending to support this. Once we lose species, we lose them. We don't want to be in a situation where the law of the land allows us to, or allows people to create the situation where, a species is brought to the edge of extinction before anything is or can be done to try and bring it back from the brink. So thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Carr, do you wish to sum up?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Let's just move to the vote.
Thank you. Those in favour of the motion? Anybody against? Again, you almost voted against. Again, that's unanimous, and thank you that that motion is carried. It's been an interesting meeting, I think a fairly good humoured one. I'm minded that the Boundary Commission want to know how many councillors we should have. Maybe 26 might be quite a good answer. Anyway, we'll look at that. That brings the business of this evening's meeting to a close.
Mr. Mayor, before you bring the meeting to a close, I understand that Councillor Prosser did approach you about an emergency motion, and we were waiting for your ruling on this evening's meeting.
Yes, Councillor Prosser did approach me. He wished to bring an emergency motion, which can be done if I agree that the topic is of such urgency that it cannot wait till the next meeting. His subject was the compulsory vaccination of care workers, which was announced by the Prime Minister very publicly long before the closing date for notices of motion. Therefore, I did not feel that this was sufficiently urgent, that it couldn't have been brought in time like all the other motions, and could equally well be debated at the next meeting. And that is my ruling on the matter. It was not sufficiently urgent. Thank you for that. Thank you to everyone who's been able to join us on the Derby Loves You venue this evening, and to those watching online. I look forward to seeing you again in September. Who knows where? Thanks very much. Good night.